Slide up here, I have a picture of these three young ladies who graduated from pediatrics just 2 years ago from the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The one over on the furthest is my daughter. She's studying neonatology now. She's getting her 14th year of post-high school education. So it's kind of a long tail for many of us, although she actually then went and married an Air Force officer who has nothing to do with medicine. He's an aerospace medicine guy. And he can't tell me what he does. He does something with NSA, and now he's down in Florida doing something which. So we don't have very long discussions about his work. So that's he's assigned here, he's assigned there. That's about all we know. So let me tell you about something that happened when I was finishing up my residency. I came from a hospital. It was a big urban hospital. It was pretty much run by the residents. That was the tradition back then, and it still kind of is in a lot of places. We had a 7-year-old boy that we admitted, and he was admitted as an incomplete Kawasaki. Anybody here ever heard of Kawasaki's disease? Yeah, it's a funny, strange inflammatory syndrome, more common in Asia, described after Kawasaki in Japan. A guy actually got to meet in the 1980s, and he's still alive. He's very senior, very respected clinician. And anyways, this child had a high fever, 104 degrees, for 4 to 5 days, which kind of starts meeting that criteria. He had conjunctival injection, he had red lips, he was irritable, no appetite, he's a little bit photophobic. And he started having a rash, which is fairly common in Kawasaki's. So we admitted him to what we call our infectious disease ward to give him IVIG, which at that time we were giving over 4 to 5 days. It's different than we do now, where we just pump you full within 24 hours and we send you back out again. We were kind of short on beds, so we actually had to put him in one of our reverse isolation rooms just because we ran out of beds. The only thing I had to notice that he had much more of a cough than a typical Kawasaki's. Kawasaki's doesn't affect the lungs very much. That kind of threw us off a bit. So here's a picture of him here. Does he look sick to you? He looks very pink too, because I think this is old Kodachrome, which is sort of a pinkish film, which you're all familiar with digital cameras now. But you can see he's got some conjunctival involvement. He's got some crusting around his eyes, wet nose, cracked, dry, red lips, and he's got a rash that's kind of marching down his body. Now, this is another child I took care of just about 4 years later at Walter Reed, which they now call Walter Reed Classic on Georgia Avenue, when I was in training there. And it actually almost looks like him, doesn't it? This kid looks a little less inflamed, but you can see he's got some conjunctival injection, puffiness and crusting around his eyes and mouth. He's chewing on his fingers there. But some people have accused me that this is the same patient, except this one clearly is younger. He's about 3 years old. He's got different hair than this guy, but they look like they could be brothers, right? So anyways, that child ended up having measles, and I got chewed out by the head of infectious disease for not recognizing it. But having had measles in about 1962, I didn't remember it very well, and none of us saw it through all of the 70s and 80s. So there's a lot of rashes that look like measles, and periodically you'll be asked, do you think this patient has measles? Particularly if you're in an exotic location like the military goes to, and you're dealing with refugees, or you're dealing with a failed state where people have lost organizations, and it might be possible that you're dealing with measles. Here's some things that look kind of like measles. We use the term morbilliform rash, which literally means measles-like. This is a summer enterovirus rash like we see every day in the clinic at this time of year. Just a faint, splotchy rash, not as dramatic as what that one child has. This is a purpuric rash. This child was flat on his back with a temp 104, had the worst headache in his life, and was from this area. Anybody want to guess what he had? Purpuric rash from his arms and feet working their way inward. Okay, he had Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And we gave doxycycline, he got better in about 3 days and lived. This child looks too good. You know, he's got a dramatic rash. And near as we can tell, he had a summer enterovirus since about 1991. But look how clear his face is. No crusting. His eyes are bright white and wide open. But he's got reddish lips, so we never figured this one out. This child has influenza. That's one of my sons. The bottom line is you shouldn't show too much to the family. I'm already showing you too great for the family here. But he had sort of crusty red eyes and an erythema in his face and swollen lips. Didn't really have much of a rash. This child had a very spectacular red rash, but was not physically feeling that badly. And he ended up having mononucleosis, got amoxicillin, and we still really haven't proven that. A lot of people think mononucleosis makes you have a bad time when you get amoxicillin, 10 or 15% get a rash. But it turns out everybody who gets mono is prone to these strange immunologic rashes. These two patients are actually sicker than measles. Both of them have variants. Everyone would guess they have really bad conjunctivitis, sloughing mouths, and strange systemic rashes. Stevens-Johnson's, yeah. This one had gotten a new medication for nervous system disorder, so did she. So the bottom line is, particularly with anticonvulsants, these are really bad on the system. This fellow was really interesting. We saw him just about 3.5 years ago, and he's got a dramatic rash that you can see is really well defined in Uptodate. And in fact, he was written up, but this turned out to also be EBV with a strange cutaneous rash. We have it in measles type isolation. How contagious is measles? Anybody want to guess? Very, okay. What is the most contagious infectious disease we know on the face of the earth? Measles. I would argue measles. Everybody has their favorite disease. You're going to see 40 people in the next month who are going to talk about their favorite disease. And it's a lot of fun because we're passionate about our favorite diseases. But particularly with these recent sci-fi movies that have to talk about are not, how contagious something is. Ebola is about 2.5 or 3, meaning that if you were all naive to Ebola and somebody walked through your room with Ebola, we know spread is not necessarily direct aerosol, but upwards of maybe 3 people for every person who's infected will get the disease. That's pretty good. Influenza is somewhere around 2. It varies a little bit sometimes with global disease. Measles is around 18. And there actually was a report of somebody with measles walking through a gate in the airport. 2 hours later, another person who was susceptible passed through that gate going in the opposite direction, coming off the plane and came down with measles. And they're able to fingerprint the virus enough that they can tell where it came from. So this is some of the interesting stuff. How many of you have ever seen a patient with topic spots? Anybody in the room? I'm not seeing any hands up. I've seen a couple. And to be honest, in both cases, I did not recognize what it was. What does that look like? That looks like thrush, right? Looks like an adult with thrush or a child with thrush. They're just these vague bluish-white spots inside the cheek. When you scrape them, they don't come off very well. Thrush comes off a little better. But this is what measles looks like around day 2 and around day 4. But the trouble with topic spots is you start getting a fever and cough, which is about as vague as anything. Then about a day later, you get topic spots, and they fade in about 30 hours. So you can almost never see them. And then the rash starts on the scalp, and it works its way down the body. By the time the rash is in place, you're not going to see topic spots. I see this all the time where somebody says, well, we've got a systemic rash, but we're not seeing anything in the mouth. And I say, well, you're not working anyways. So the bottom line is, the bad news is, during this time period where we don't know what people have, they have a fever, cough, conjunctivitis, sometimes a little bit of a wet face, eyes, a runny nose and mouth. They're very, very contagious, about 2 days before the rash emerges. And that's why we don't seem to be able to eliminate measles. But people have smallpox, when the rash appears, is when they start getting contagious. So the rash precedes when people become contagious, and it was easy to isolate. There's no way to do that with measles. They're usually sick before you know it. That's what it looks like around day 1 of the rash. This is from the humanitarian assistance course. These are old stock slides. But you can see it's mostly on the face and upper body. Around day 2, it starts to fade a little bit, marches down the body. It's also not so bright red. It's more of a dark, ruddy red, like salmon color. Day 3, it becomes kind of fluid, looks like paint running together, particularly up and down the sides of the chest and that. And so if you get to see somebody every day in a row, which you might in a refugee situation or a hospital situation, you can see that. Diagnostically, there's not a whole lot you can do. You got a good public health lab, they will run an IgM for you right away. And let me tell you, measles is such a public health emergency because of that high infectivity and contagiousness that most public health labs, if you call them up and say you're an experienced clinician, you think you're dealing with measles, they will say, how fast can you get a serum specimen to us? Which is really weird to hear from a lab, because the lab never is in a hurry to get it. So the bottom line is, they will do that quickly, even on a Friday afternoon. And it persists for about 1 to 2 months. The other thing is the white count is usually low. That's a bit of a hallmark. And then we can do PCRs off of secretions, we can do them off the blood. But the bottom line is, the IgM is still probably the most reliable test. You also would like to try to grow the virus, if possible, on viral culture. The CDC wants to see every virus from anybody with measles. We're talking about a few hundred cases a year in the U.S., and they'd like to know what is the country of origin. Like I said, we can fingerprint and sequence the virus so we know exactly what type of serotype or subtype it is. We can tell if it's from the Philippines, if it's from something that's been circulating in China, if it's something that's somewhere else in the world. But the immediate diagnosis is clinical. Generally, what you do now is you get a bunch of people together. Has anybody ever gone through this drill where you think you might be dealing with measles? Okay, so a couple hands over. Did you get a whole bunch of people to come look at that patient? That's the normal thing, and that's a good thing to do. Then you have a consensus, sort of, like that. It's like gladiators, like thumbs up, thumbs down. And then the other thing is you're hopefully doing that with some caution and isolation. Because I'll tell you a few stories. Now, if you do get an exposure where somebody with measles has been in your ER or your clinic, you got about 72 hours where you can immunize anybody who's naive or who you can't verify the record. And then you got up to 6 days where you can give them a dose of IG. The neat thing is that, there are specialty IGs. You're going to hear about rabies immune globulin, there's varicella immune globulin, there's hepatitis B immune globulin. Every collection of immune globulin that's manufactured commercially in the world has good measles titer because most of the people in the world are well vaccinated against measles. And you keep that antibody for a long time. And if you're naturally immune to measles, which I'm about the last group that's proven to be naturally immune, those born around the 1957 to 58 border, we basically have great titers for the rest of our lives. We also can go down to about 6 months. So when people say, do we think this is measles, you say, well, where have they been? Have they been somewhere where they've traveled? Have they been exposed to a traveler? So, are we second degree already? And like I said, you get a whole number of experienced people look at the patient. The trouble is, this term, morbilliform rash, means measles-like. And there's a whole lot of things that look like it. Like I said, viruses, drug eruptions, a few bacterial infections like rickettsia, some of the autoimmune diseases like Kawasaki's. So this was at Wilford Hall in 1988. This is a child who came in with a really harsh, brassy cough near the end of the day. And I saw this little kid with his mom. You see, he's got a reddish rash that's working his way down his head. He actually had complex spots the days before, and I had seen him. So when I saw him now, he's got conjunctivitis. I'm not wearing gloves because this is 30 years ago. He's got red lips. He's got a bit of a crusty face. And to be honest, he would have been case number 5 for San Antonio. Some of you might remember this, but in the late 1980s, we had a second sort of surge of measles. That's when we went from 1 to 2 vaccines across the country as a routine. But we actually called the health department within an hour or so. I had to call people from the hospital, and they said, you better be sure. They said, because this would be case number 5 in the city this month, and that would push us into an epidemic mode. We'd have to reassess everybody's immunization status. It was like late spring. They'd have to go to all the schools and have people bring all the records because this was pre-computer time. And they thought it was going to cost them a couple $1 million if we did this. So I got Dr. Howard Johnson, who had joined the Air Force sometime during the Civil War, and he had about 45 years, mostly from like the late 40s through the early 90s. So I grabbed him, and he came in, and Dr. Johnson only said about 3 words a day, and he said, yep, it's measles. So anyways, I was a young guy, so I played heck out, and then we did send an IgM down there that was positive, and the city went into epidemic mode, a lot of people got reimmunized, and it was a big cluster, to be honest. So these are dramatic events when you identify somebody with measles. The other thing is, which I've learned, is that kid looks sick. They breathe fast, they have this terrible brassy, croupy cough. And you'll want to admit every child you ever see with measles, because they look bad. Although the fatality and complication rate is about 1 out of 1,000, they still look miserable. That's why we say measly. That's where the term comes from. You're miserable, you're awful, you're irritating. The bottom line is, we don't like the term. And you'll want to admit all of them, but the hospital will not thank you. Because on the very same ward, you might have somebody who has a hematologic disorder, you might have somebody with a lot of other chronic morbidities because they're in the hospital, and you're walking a measles patient, you do strange things like you bring them up through the back door, through the janitor's elevator, through the tower. You do things to sneak them in with respiratory isolation, and even then, they usually look hard at the ward because it's so contagious. The books say that there's 7 or 8% that have otitis. Every single kid, I've seen about a dozen kids with measles over about 25 years, they all have fluid behind their ears, and some of them have more form of otitis. Virtually all of them have a croupy cough, and if you don't hear a cough, it's probably not measles, to be honest. Now, for the younger children, under the age of 2 or so, the biggest risk is a primary measles pneumonitis. Measles is a lot like RSV. It's closely related to the flu. It's related to parainfluenza. All these viruses are in the same families, and they spread through the lungs in a primary bronchiolitis, and then a diffuse small airway pneumonia, and that's what causes young children to die of, as well as afterwards. Older children, adolescents, which was a common group to get measles in the late 1980s, like that 7-year-old was a little younger than an adolescent, but what they get is they get encephalitis. And in fact, I still remember when I was in middle school, when we were finishing up with measles in the U.S. around 1970, one of my classmates was out for a month with measles. And when she came back, she was slower. And I don't mean like she walked slower. I mean, she actually was a different person. She was not as sharp. They put her in front of the room. She had a hearing aid. It was very dramatic. We were all upset. What happened to that? That's not quite right, you know. So the bottom line is, she kind of got better over a few years, but she took a CNS hit from having measles and encephalitis and almost died. One of the bad things is that as we get to where we have intermediate levels of immunization, you start shifting the curve to older ages and you see more of this. So you might replace what is kind of a bad toddler illness with a really serious young adult illness. So that's something where we have to keep up and adjust our immunization policy to take care of this. I'll come back to that. This is Sonny, who I took care of back when Andrews had an inpatient peds ward in the early 90s. My wife was working over there as a staff doc, and she said this kid came back from Africa. Dad actually worked with the State Department as some sort of liaison. We always say spy, of course, but we couldn't prove it. But the bottom line is, his wife was from Nigeria. They were visiting friends and relatives, which is a really common way to get international diseases, and it's really fun. It's fun for us because people don't do the protective things and they come back with great diseases. So the bottom line is, they thought he had malaria. He had 6 different smears done, and they couldn't find malaria, but he had this relentless fever on the ward. But the interesting thing is, he's a very dark child. Family had very dark skin. You can see he's got crusting eyes and a crusting nose. And when I went to go see him on the ward with my wife and a couple of other pediatricians there, he suddenly started this really harsh barking cough. And I looked at him, and then I realized he had this sort of palpable rash. But you can't see it because he's got such a nice, rich, dark color. And I realized, OSH, blank, this looks like measles. And it turns out that 6 healthcare workers got infected out of this. Because even though we were catching up on a lot of people with 2 doses of measles vaccine, it was around 91.5, so we didn't get everybody. So it was a significant exposure to the hospital. So he was 11 and 3 more 4 months old. At that time, we were giving MMR between 12 and 15 months, which we still do for the first dose, so he brought it back. Measles looks different in people with different color skin. It's a simple thing. In places in the world where we have large populations of people with different skin, sometimes we don't recognize measles. The other thing is if you have nutritional deficiencies, a displaced population like in Sudan, or on the edges of Ethiopia, or in Somalia and other areas, when you're nutritionally deficient, measles does not look like that classic ruddy red rash. This is a fellow named Dave Ayers, who's a missionary, former Army pediatrician. He's got several of his own kids, he's adopted several kids. He is one of these people who lives sort of a saintly life. He's been taking care of needy people in Africa for the last 5 or 6 years. And when he first went over there in Ethiopia, he had a huge outbreak of measles, 24 cases, 18 admitted within 24 hours, 5 deaths, all in about a 3-day period. And they have an area where people have been displaced by civil war. And the bottom line is, a lot of them are malnourished. This is one of the pictures he sent us not too long ago. You can see the rash is kind of faint. It just doesn't bubble up as much because immunologically, this child is not responding as aggressively with the vasculitis. This child has clearly got some quashing or some protein malnutrition and has almost an eczematous type rash that hung around for a long time. It's hung around for a couple weeks. You can see the child has that startled look like, I don't know if I'm still alive. So other things happen. There's something called NOMA or cancrum oris, where children who survive measles but have chronic undernutrition, particularly vitamin A deficiency, they can get these necrotic oral lesions that are really devastating, and then they usually die. The other thing is there's a lot of blindness because of pernicious and persistent vitamin A deficiency. So anytime, anywhere, if somebody looks like they have measles, you can supplement them with vitamin A according to this chart. But in, particularly in refugee camps, they keep a lot of vitamin A around because it's very cheap, it's very easy to supplement the population. And there's some evidence, not proven as well, that it might help against other respiratory infections. So measles wreaks havoc on the immune system in the short term and in the long term. One of the reasons we control measles is not just for measles mortality, but anywhere that there is measles, in the next few years, children who survive measles have a much higher death rate than everything else. So they'll survive their measles, and then they'll die of enteritis, or they'll die of pneumonia 6 months later. So all in all, childhood mortality goes up tremendously after measles is burned through an area. It's a funny paradox. And we often talk about the measles paradox, because what happens is your memory T cells get wiped out to everything else. previous vaccines don't work as well to protect you. Ones that you got against DPT and other bacterial antigens. So all childhood mortality goes up for the next 5 years, which protected against measles. It's a very weird imbalance. But the bottom line is, it's just a bad thing to survive measles in many areas of the world. So what's been happening? This is some of the figures that the World Health Organization publishes. They just published a new international measles plan about 2015, and it was called their Global Measles and Rubella Strategic Plan, ranging from 2012 to 2020. They did mostly epidemiology here, but you can see around the year 2000, when I first started talking about measles, there were about 535,000 annual deaths related to measles. They wanted to try to focus particularly on the under 5-year population. They showed at that time maybe about 3/4 of the children in the world got one immunization. Now they've reduced that by about 75%. There's a little over 100,000 deaths per year in the last year that they did really global epidemiology, and nearly all children, about 84%, had at least one immunization. The goal now is to get 2 immunizations in all children in the world by the time they're about a year and a half old. And there's about 2/3 of the country that have over 90% of the population covered. We'll come back to this, but this is a flank of cattle. Herd. Okay, I noticed some Texans here, you know, that's something you might recognize. So we'll talk about herd immunity because this is the most important disease for herd immunity comes in. This is what happened in the U.S. So this is when I had my measles. 400,000 or 500,000 reported cases per year, but with 3 or 4 million people born a year in the U.S. for the last 60 years, you know there were probably 3 or 4 million cases of measles. They just didn't report all of them. This is the vaccine coming in around 68. Suddenly we're down to 100,000. By the early 1980s, we're down to single-digit cases per year, maybe 10 or 15, a low point. And then all of a sudden, a blip around 1990, 55,000 cases. That's when I was finishing my training and I got to see some measles. Then we got that under control with 2 immunizations, came back down again, we had a low point, and then we get into increased measles, partly related to globalization, a lot of international travel, and partly related to vaccine avoidance, which we'll finish up on talking about. So, in 2008, there were 3 big outbreaks in the U.S., but in 2011, almost 30 countries in the European region, virtually every country, had outbreaks of measles. There were 11 outbreaks about 5 years later in the U.S., 3 of them with at least 20 cases. 2014, 23 outbreaks with over 600 cases. We're going in the wrong direction. And this is with relatively small numbers still. There was a big outbreak in the Amish in Ohio. They periodically are relatively indifferent. They're not necessarily anti-vaccine. That's a misnomer. But they're just not necessarily focused on preventive medicine practices that lead to frequent vaccination. But the 2014 cases, this big year where we had over 600 cases related to measles brought over from the Philippines, and you say, wow. Some of you might remember this. Almost 4 years ago, there was a massive typhoon, Super Typhoon Yolanda, which was about 4 times as big as the one that hit our Gulf Coast for Katrina. Over 6,000 immediate fatalities, with somewhere in the neighborhood of about a quarter of the health clinics in the country were damaged. And it impacted 60 million people who then had delayed immunization. About 4 million people were displaced, and within 1 or 2 months, we suddenly got up to 58,000 cases in the country with over 100 deaths in the Philippines, and they're just now getting on top of that. And so we went up to about 10-fold greater deaths and about 10-fold more cases. It was all this B3 genotype, which doesn't mean anything except that's what we saw in Disneyland in late 2014. So what you see is the impact of possible climate change, larger storms, devastates the country, changes our healthcare system, leads to outbreaks of measles, which then come to the west coast of the U.S. about a year later. So these things are kind of interconnected. And this is what happened then in 2015. We had this big outbreak, largely clustered around Disneyland in California, and it was the B3 isolate, which originally came from the Philippines. Then we got better control in the last couple of years. Drifted down, a lot more outbreaks in Minnesota recently, because a lot of people in Minnesota are smarter than the government. So that's okay. Globally, we kind of stalled. Around 2005, 2006, we had gotten down to where we were getting near that 100 and 150,000 range per year of measles deaths. But you can see, they continue on, particularly Southeast Asia. We don't have as good coverage. So, an unstable world to make measles eradication hard. Turns out that about 17% of all deaths under 5 years of age are vaccine preventable. And you can say that number over 100,000. And as I mentioned, we have pretty good coverage by the second birthday with one measles immunization, better than in 1990. But look at the areas where we had measles cases reported in the middle of 2015. Largely Central Africa, parts of Central and Southeast Asia, and then the islands. Look where we have our greatest population density. Same 3 regions. Look where we have our political instability index, 4 regions of the world where the governments have been changing over too quickly to serve the people. Central Africa, Southwest and Southeast Asia, and the island nations. And then, to some degree, in South or Central America, but at least they've been able to keep up immunization status so we don't have outbreaks there. And then this year, coming fast forward about 4 years, we've again now got outbreaks Central Africa, Southeast Asia, to a lesser degree in the islands. They're doing a better job now that they've caught up with that typhoon. But you can see Europe now has a lot more measles. That's related to vaccine avoidance. This is what the figures look like so far as of about 2 months ago when I updated them. You can see we still see a fair number of cases in Africa. Europe has got more numbers than they should have. Western Pacific has got pretty good numbers. So measles can be controlled, but I think it's going to be close to impossible to eliminate, to be honest. This is a child that was adopted from China that I saw at Andrews Air Force Base in 2004. I saw the child in the library, and they closed the library after I saw the child. It was a satellite building, and I think they have a permit now, but it was a trailer. We needed a warm space to see this child, but we didn't let the child anywhere near the hospital. The child had been adopted from China, and you can see the rash is kind of vague, but look at her. She's sort of sick. She was not deathly ill. She's crusty. She's got conjunctivitis. She's got a rash marching down her body. She had a very positive IgM, and she was in the MMWR. It's kind of a mixed blessing. You know, you feel proud to have your work show up in MMWR, but it's one from a disease that nobody should have. It kind of makes you feel a little funny. So 3 in Washington and 1 in Maryland were serologically confirmed. So we took care of the 1 in Maryland. About 25 hospital workers had to get either IG or immunized, including one pregnant lady who they didn't want to immunize, so they gave her IG in a very large dose. But the bottom line is, these are all people who saw this child through multiple clinic and ER visits. So measles, again, is incredibly contagious. So is this directly military relevant? Well, a lot of you are going to be doing humanitarian support work. Well, when I was in Iraq in 2008, anybody at this place? 32nd? I see a lot of Air Force colleagues there. Flying in and out of there, maybe. So the bottom line is we had a lot of civilian emergencies. This little girl got burned. I don't remember what the situation was. I think she pulled something down in the kitchen. And we were still pretty busy with casualties, but periodically we'd do civilian emergencies. She came in, she had conjunctivitis and a vague rash too, and I did not like that. Because I was the peds IV doc, I was the SGH of the hospital, and we brought her in, but I said, God, I'd hate to have a contagious measles patient on our ward. We just had these big open wards. We had a couple pseudo-isolation rooms, but it wasn't a real strong facility for being able to control this sort of thing. And I thought we were seeing some measles because we saw 2 or 3 kids in an ER, which I've taken in the corner and tried to keep them away from other patients, but we were pretty sure, and it turns out that they proved this a couple years later, that the government, such as it was at that time, showed that they had probably 18,000 cases during that time frame when their infrastructure fell down because of the prolonged Civil War. And they had 2 really fairly large outbreaks in 2008, 2009. I couldn't get serology back at any kind of relevant period. I didn't get it back in 3 hours like I did in Texas in 1988. So the bottom line is we'd send out serology, we might see it before we redeploy. So this fellow, Maurice Hillman, was in the Department of the Army for about 10 years plus. They worked at Europe. He developed 36 vaccines, either himself or conceptually for teams, including measles, mumps, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, varicella, pneumococcal, and HIV. He probably saved more lives than any other human who's ever lived on the face of the earth. His daughter is named Geraldine. She's still alive. We'll talk about her in a few minutes when we move into mumps, because he recovered her virus when she had mumps to make the Geraldine mumps vaccine, which is a fairly effective mumps vaccine. Dr. Paul Offit has a documentary that should be coming out pretty soon on, he has the book that's available called One Man's Quest to Defeat the World's Deadliest Disease. He is one of the best educators about vaccine safety, and he's sponsored by the CDC to do a lot of baseline teaching around the country. But the bottom line is he's kind of fighting that upstream through the culture. This is one of the things that they knew from early on. This is a study from Dr. Bass and Dr. Fisher, who were line managers back in the 1980s, and they showed that after one dose of MMR, about 93% of people are protected against measles. By the way, just note this figure here, 78% for mumps, which is not that great. And then after 2 doses, 97 or more percent are protected against measles. There's no reason, we don't really understand why it takes 2 doses. It's not like those people are resistant to the vaccine or they don't respond. For some reason, it just doesn't take some of the time. So that's why we try to give 2 doses, and the standard school system likes to see 1 dose after a year of age and another dose after 4. You can't fight with it. Has anybody ever tried to argue with the school system about a shot record? School system wins. School system with 160,000 students like Montgomery County. I tried to fight this once, it was just kind of a fool's job, you know. But you cannot change your mind when you say this person is effectively immunized, even if they got their 2nd shot before the 4th. But the bottom line is, you can see the duration of immunity is pretty good for measles. As far as we know, upwards of 11 to 15 years. So far, since we started adding that booster in the late 80s, early 90s, we've gotten good protection against measles in the U.S. from 2 shots. Less good, a little less good with mumps. That's okay. So the measles vaccine is very effective, but you need 2 doses. Yeah?
Sir, on that last slide, does that mean that it weans after 15 years and you need another booster, or?
That's a good question. You know, we don't know yet. In big outbreaks that have occurred related to, like I said, the Disneyland exposure, and then these clusters in Seattle and Minnesota and in the middle of the country, somewhere in the neighborhood of a handful, usually 4 or 5 out of about 100 patients, seem to have 2 immunizations on board. And they're not sure if there is waning. So it is possible that before too long, in all of our professional lives, before I fully retire, they will probably, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get to a 3rd MMR later in life. The only problem is that, particularly the rubella component, seems to cause some reactive arthritis in a small number of people as you get older. So adults will get the MMR, particularly women sometimes have joint aches for weeks afterwards. So it's a live virus vaccine. We start getting into ages where people have other morbidities, and it's a worry. But I'll bring it up when we talk about mumps in a few minutes, because mumps is even less good. Mumps seems to wane faster. The Air Force did a intake of all their students coming in for training at Lackland Air Force Base about 2 years ago. And they showed that a pretty good number, about 10% of that population had deficient titers against measles, but about 20% against mumps. So I really think that adult immunization is going to expand over the next few years. So if you need these 2 doses, herd immunity is somewhere around this magic number, around the 90th percentile. Does anybody watch that fellow, what's his name, John Oliver, who does the late TV? He had a vaccine rant just recently. It was out around the 4th of July. You guys ought to pull it off on YouTube because it's there. But it's about an 18-minute one. Now, he has a lot of really off-color bad jokes in there, and so I couldn't show it here. It's really inappropriate. But he's got a pretty good summary of what's going on with measles. He talks a lot about this number of 90th percent, maybe a little higher, for being that if your population is protected to that rate, you're doing well. If you get to where you're down in the 80s or less, then you're going to have measles propagate because of that R factor of contagiousness. So herd immunity is really important here. So we were doing very well, and then you got this fellow, Andrew Wakefield. I'm sorry, that's supposed to be 1998. I just made this slide up. You want to believe in evil? You know, I don't know if you're religious or if you're agnostic, but you know, most religions believe that there's an evil force. I mean, even Star Wars does. But the bottom line is, you know, this fellow, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, has this relatively soft paper, and I pulled the original a while back. 12 case studies of people with primarily GI disorders, but associated by the parents with recent MMR vaccine. Not even good science into the interval. And it turns out that quite a few of them had neurodevelopmental disorders. And he had not disclosed the fact that he had received almost $700,000 in support from a consortium of lawyers in the UK who were suing for possible autism related to measles. He's the guy who founded this, how would you want to say, fake news, or false science. And since that time, the journal, The Lancet, a fairly impressive journal, retracted the article. You can't even find it, because if you find it in copies on the internet, it'll say retracted and it stands, you can hardly read it. The co-authors removed their support. He lost his license. He's basically been banned from Europe, so he moved to the U.S. He lives in Texas now, and he advises parents groups on safe vaccine practices. He was advising the Somali community about 7 years ago, and now we have measles in Minnesota related to Somalis not living in the MMR. So unfortunately, particularly this year, there's 78 people who developed measles. From January to May, the latest update was 74 under 18, and nearly all were unvaccinated because they interfaced with Dr. Wakefield, who, kind of interesting when we talked about the fellow who probably developed the most vaccines to save the most people, this fellow is working in the opposite direction. There's also two other side issues that you might hear about from families. You hear about thimerosal? Thimerosal has never been used in measles vaccine. It basically is for multi-dose vaccines. It's a tiny amount of a mercury salt that, as far as we know, is not toxic, but it kills bacteria and fungi. It was primarily in multi-dose flu shots, and it's still available in a couple preparations of 10-dose vials for influenza. But it's never been in the MMR. The other thing that has some truth to it is that the original rubella vaccine was grown up in a cell line that was derived from a voluntary interruption of pregnancy or abortion. This has led some ethical groups to talk about the fact that a portion of the MMR vaccine was derived from aborted fetuses. And then it starts getting kind of a little nasty if you expand that. Does anybody know why they did this? Why they were working with fetal cell lines? The original polio virus was grown in a monkey kidney cell line. And it turns out some of those cell lines in the 50s and 60s for the very successful oral polio virus were contaminated with simian virus 40. And it's an HIV type virus. And there's a whole conspiracy group that believes that HIV evolved from the polio vaccine. If you go on the internet and Google right now, you'll find it. But the bottom line is, there's no proof there, but it also was felt to be a little bit dangerous to use uncleared animal cell lines. So they used some of these human cell lines from people really almost didn't know the origins. So some of the vaccine stock was originally grown up on cell lines that were derived from interruptions of pregnancies that was voluntary, not accidental. The Vatican actually made a statement, that's a little ahead of myself here again, sorry. In 2013, they said you have to weigh the risk-benefit. That if you were actually promoting the use of these cells to derive vaccines, that would be wrong, but that if you're trying to protect your community by using this vaccine in control, that's okay. And the bottom line is they're saying in the future, we hope that vaccines are done in a more ethical fashion. So they were pretty good about that. And it's reassuring to many people, but not everybody. Celebrity tends to trump facts. I'm sorry, I didn't do it that way. It tends to overcome facts. I'm apolitical. But this is Dr. Fauci, the head of the NIAID. And we get to talk about it quite a bit. Anybody know who this is? Jane McCarthy. She's backed down a bit, as have done a number of politicians, with their sort of vague associations linking autism with MMR. But there's this whole internet set of science that's not exactly founded. The trouble is, though, risk is a hard thing to appraise. And there's a whole new research here going about risk and risk information to families. People want to control. In the U.S., the whole desire to have control over your environment, over your risk, to have a safer car, to have your children safe, and it's all out of good intentions. We all want good for our families and communities. And you don't perceive the disease risk for something you've never seen in your lifetime. Many of you have never seen measles. You've never seen somebody gasping for breath, or the 6 deaths in 24 hours that Dr. Ayers saw in Africa. So the problem is how do you try to educate people about a risk-benefit ratio that may be 1 to 700,000? So again, the World Health Organization is pushing hard to try and get 2 doses into everybody. They're focusing different strategies in different regions. Where measles still breaks out sporadically every year, they're trying to give earlier doses, 9 to 12 months of age, where it's relatively effective with the vaccine, and then a second one at 15 to 18 months, and if necessary, another one at 4 to 6 years of age. And they've got this elimination plan that they think 5 of 6 regions will lose endemic measles, but they're not so sure about parts of Southeast Asia and the island nations of the Pacifics. Let's switch to mumps a little bit. Mumps has a longer incubation, about 16 to 18 days. Virus is shed for about a week before and a week after mumps, so it's harder to control that way. And then most people have either unilateral or bilateral carotid swelling with mumps. You usually don't see much in the way of skin redness or pus from sensitiveness, it's just local pain. Does anybody here ever see mumps? And I've seen parotitis several times. I'm not sure if it's mumps or not. Were yours confirmed with mumps?
Confirmed.
Okay. How long ago was it? Where?
It was at Fort Sam, the AAT population. We had, I think, 5 or 6 confirmed cases.
Okay, so you had several cases, and how old was that population?
19 to 22.
Okay, that's great, because that's something that we all deal with, young, healthy adults, and that's where the mumps vaccine seems to drift down. And I think rather than necessarily pushing for the third MMR because of waning measles titers, we may be doing it because of the need for mumps booster. We'll come back to that in a little bit. I've seen a few young adults with mumps, they feel kind of miserable. Amylase goes up, it's a mixture of carotid involvement and pancreatic involvement. Quite a few of them have a very mild, borderline symptomatic meningitis or encephalitis. Did you help care for some of those patients?
Yes.
Did they feel awful?
Some of them didn't feel too bad.
Okay, there's a whole spectrum there. Did anybody have bronchitis?
No orchitis. We actually had 2 or 3 submandibular instead of carotid.
Okay, so they have more extensive disease with multiple salivary glands. Yeah, about a third of post-pubertal males with develop bronchitis would definitely be common in our population. The good news there is it's usually only unilateral, but about half of them who recover lose that testing, it scars up, kind of shrivels. So this is what happened. We started seeing more mumps around 2006. We got a little more aggressive catching up on immunization. We got back down into the lowest range, but it periodically surges about every 3 or 4 years for reasons we don't understand. And the CDC likes to say we have a 99% reduction in all mumps, and it's a very effective vaccine, but just in the last year and a half, we've had big university outbreaks, very similar to our training sites. Champaign, Urbana, University of Illinois had over 300 documented cases just about a year ago. And they proved at least a third of them by PCR. And they tried to use quarantine, which really works in the dorms for 19-year-olds. They don't have the sort of strict restriction of quarters that we can put on board. And about 97% of these students had 2 shots. And those who had mumps, almost 90% had been verified to have the 2 shots. So we had a high rate of immunization. They actually did the extraordinary recommendation of giving dose number 3 for over 50,000 students and faculty at that site, as well as the University of Iowa, which had a similar outbreak. They don't yet want to make it a national standard because it's going to cost a lot of money. The vaccine's about $15 to $18 for the federal government, but just think if we had immunized the 2 million people or so that we're responsible for in that age group. That would immediately be an expense of a couple $100 million plus all the support for building up immunization clinics to re-immunize everybody. But in 2017, so far through June, we've got 3,500 cases. So while you may very well never see measles, unless you work in areas of the world where there is measles, there's a good chance you'll see mumps. And one of the problems with mumps is a lot of other things cause peritonitis. Enteroviruses do, sometimes just getting dehydrated will do that. Here's an old picture because I don't have a good picture of a patient I've seen with mumps. This girl's got a really big swollen carotid gland. It's just a little bit of erythematous. She's got some mandibular involvement too. You can tell this is an old picture. We're gonna, oh, that's a cell phone from the 1970s. So that's really old. As well as the bed, just like being in an old ugly wooden bed. So what happens to your testing? It's a normal testing. By the way, that's a dog testing because we don't usually biopsy normal human testes unless we're in a very strange medical environment. But this is somebody who survived mumps, and you can see you get this thin, atretic, all the cellularity is gone, so you're not getting spermatogenesis. And where you do have it, it doesn't connect up because it's like a tube that gets crimped at different spots, and so you can become sterile. You can diagnose by IgM for acute infection, IgG for post-immunization, but since the vaccine is sort of intermediately good, these are kind of hard to sort out. The culture from the Stinson stuff, where your saliva comes out, is the best thing to do, as well as the PCR from that. So the World Health Organization a few years ago said, well, this is a mild childhood disease. Without it, we get rates of maybe about 100 to 1,000 cases for every 100,000 people. That's a pretty high number. But the risk of orchitis and meningitis is really in teens and adults. So it's one of those diseases where it's all or nothing. It's better to get it when you're 3 or 4 than when you're 15 or 20. On the other hand, if we immunize people up to where they're getting it in their 20s and 30s, they're going to have a lot more meningoencephalitis, they're going to have a lot more orchitis, and that doesn't make people happy. So there's a good chance that I think before the next several years we'll get to a third MMR, more for the mumps than for the measles. So look at some of the comparative efficacy. I made this chart just a little while ago. One dose of mumps, maybe about 95% protective, up to 97% for 2. One dose of the German mumps vaccine is somewhere in the 70%. That's not really herd immunity. There's a different vaccine they use through Europe and through Western Russia called the Uravi vaccine. It's even a little less protective than our virulent mumps vaccine. So 2-dose mumps vaccine is in the mid to high 80%. That's not really guaranteed herd immunity. So the bottom line is we're probably not doing as well with mumps protection. And I think that's my last slide, so I have a few minutes available for any questions or comments on either or both of these diseases.
Does actual infection with the virus give you a better rate of immunity?
Oh, it does always with both these viruses. Because there's not a lot of serotype variability. We can measure the subtypes for the minor changes that occur when a virus moves through different parts of the world, but it doesn't change nearly as fast as flu or some of our other pathogens. So the good news is you don't get multiple episodes of measles in a lifetime, or mumps as far as we know.
Yeah, I'm from India, and we have this measles, a big problem there. So we have different states having different coverage. So in states which are having good coverage, like more than 90%, there is an age shift in outbreaks of measles as compared to other states. So we are also having the same problem like you are seeing now, shifting to a larger, to the age group which is more. And second point was that measles vaccine, you showed that efficacy was 39% to 90% in that range. So 39% maybe because of maternal antibodies. If you give it at 9 months, maybe maternal antibodies are still there, which are attacking the vaccine, and that's why you're getting less immunity. And the second dose is important, that's why. It improves the vaccine efficacy.
No, it's a great point. It's a fast-moving epidemiology that shifts in your population. Partial or fairly good immunization rates will shift the disease to older children. That's occurred for pertussis to some degree, which is largely an adolescent disease also. There's been a lot of pertussis outbreaks because pertussis has even a shorter time period of infection. And what you were pointing about maternal antibody, that's one of the biggest frustrations. We really can't effectively immunize against measles under 6 months of age because it's a live virus, and almost everybody who is immunized has a pretty good titer. So if most moms are well immunized, then they're going to pass the antibody, as you pointed out, that protects you until about 6 months of age. We don't really ever immunize against measles under 6 months of age because it's just futility. 6 months to 12 months of age, we will give vaccines and outbreaks, but we assume that it hasn't taken, so we'll follow that up with another vaccine, and then yet another one afterwards. We end up using a lot of measles vaccine when we're kind of hyper-immunizing people. We do that for travelers. If people are going to regions where they're at risk, if they're going to be in Southeast Asia, if they're going to be going to parts of the Indian subcontinent or other places, we give a lot of extra measles vaccine to people in our travel clinic over at the hospital at the Hill. Any other comments or questions?
With the increase of outbreaks in university populations, is the DoD going to make recommended changes to immunize a third immunization for recruits?
I haven't seen anything on that yet. And actually, I was looking a bit because this is sort of brewing on the websites. The DoD often defers largely to what the national practices are. You know, like for the HPV vaccine, they phased it in after the ACIP, which has representation from the DoD. The ACIP has about 100 members in it. That's the committee that kind of sets standards for the U.S. But so far, I don't know that yet, except I think that one study, particularly, maybe I should make a slide of it, the one from the recruit population of Lackland Air Force Base suggests that we're going to have problems with mumps, and then we may get some problems with measles, particularly since as we get more to sporadic nation-building mode like we were in the 90s, for those of you who were in the 90s, when we were going to countries for 6 months or a year to help stabilize them after a conflict, and then coming back out again, we're going to expose the populations that have endemic rates of both these diseases. Yeah?
To not answer this question, but I know they are more alert because we just went through, I think at the end of June, if you didn't have 2 documented shots or you were titered, then you're not medically ready anymore. I just went through that with my squadrons. But my question is, are there any other sequelae other than like the arthritis you mentioned to just giving people more vaccine?
I don't know of other sequelae. That was the number one that people were concerned about. Also, a number of people will get like a regional adenitis close to where the measles vaccine is administered. I've seen that plenty of times, and families get upset when they see like a lump in their groin because the child got it in the front of their leg. We try to tell them that that's a good sign. We kind of make this stuff up. No. We say that's a good sign. It means your child's immune system is seeing the virus and you're going to have a really good protective response. And there's truth to that. But that was the other one. I don't know of many other, there's nothing as far along the lines as what we used to see with the wholesale pertussis, where we might have had some encephalitis related to an adverse reaction in 1 out of 100,000 people with the pertussis vaccine that we used up to the mid-90s. So as we got away from that, measles is largely a concern, like I said, for sort of a mild immune reactivity in people who seem to be susceptible to it.
With the CDC tracking the measles genotype, is there any type of sharing among the countries, like the European countries, or does the CDC not see those genotypes until they are imported into the U.S.?
We usually know what's going on with theirs too. It's pretty commonly shared. World Health Organization has their series of bulletins, and they try to track what's going on with outbreaks also. And particularly as you get to Eastern Europe, they try to immunize a little bit earlier, just because of the fact that they're getting closer to parts of the world like Southwest Asia, where we've been involved militarily, where the immunization protection rates are sporadic and not as consistent. Most of the stuff that we're seeing in Europe, though, in the Western European nations, is all related to vaccine refusal. Dr. Wakefield first burned his way through there, and he heavily impacted the way they immunized in Britain and France. So less degree in Germany. The Germans generally do what the government tells them. But it's all great things. As you can see, we've got to kind of keep our finger on this pulse, because I think we will have some altered recommendations that will evolve in the next several years. And I really think that we'll be getting into larger scale adult immunization on a regular basis for these. And I don't know if it will ever be based on prevalence or absence of the antibodies against these, if we'll get to even bothering to do that, because much of the time the cost effectiveness of doing a ELISA to see what somebody's measles or lung titer looks like, and then deciding to make an immunization is a pretty expensive and complex action, rather than just giving another vaccine, say, at 30 years of age or so.
Thank you. And in my experience, when we have some young people who undergo mass, we need to advise these people that they can have orchitis. And these orchitis can undergo between the 14 or